Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to take off that hat. The voice was young, sharp, and laced with an unearned authority that grated on the quiet hum of the diner. Officer Miller stood over the small table, his hand resting on his service weapon, a posture he'd seen in movies and adopted as his own. Across from him, an old man sat hunched over a bowl of soup, his movements slow and deliberate. The hat in question was a simple black ball cap, frayed at the edges, with a gold Navy SEAL trident embroidered on the front. It was the trident that had ignited Miller's self-righteous indignation. He saw himself as a guardian, not just of the law, but of honor. And this man, with his threadbare coat, his deeply lined face, and the tremor in his hand as he lifted his spoon, did not fit the image of a warrior. He looked like a relic, a forgotten piece of a bygone era, and in Miller's eyes, he was a fraud. The old man, Samuel Corbin, finished his spoonful of soup before looking up. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held a depth that seemed to absorb the young officer's aggressive energy, without reflecting any of it back. "I earned the right to wear this hat, son," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was almost lost beneath the clatter of cutlery. Miller's jaw tightened. "That's what they all say," he sneered, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the other patrons. "They all say they earned it. They buy these things at a surplus store and walk around expecting free coffee and a pat on the back. It's called stolen valor. And in this town, we take it seriously." He puffed out his chest, enjoying the small audience. A family in a nearby booth hushed their children. The waitress froze, a coffee pot in her hand. Samuel just looked at him, his expression unreadable. There was no fear, no anger, just a profound weariness. "I'm not asking for anything," Samuel said quietly. "I'm just trying to eat my lunch." "Your lunch is over," Miller snapped, his patience, thin as it was, gone completely. "You're going to come with me. We're going to have a little chat about where you earned this." He reached out and snatched the hat from Samuel's head. He held it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Samuel's face. A deep, painful sorrow. It wasn't for the hat, but for what it represented, and for the casual desecration of that memory by a boy who understood nothing of its cost. "There's no need for this," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the indignity. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake here was you walking into my town wearing a lie," Miller retorted. He pulled out his handcuffs. "Stand up. Hands behind your back." The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place echoed through the now silent diner. The old man didn't resist. He moved with a stiff, pained grace, his joints protesting as he pushed himself to his feet. Miller shoved him lightly toward the door, a completely unnecessary act of dominance. As they passed the counter, the owner, a middle-aged man named George, stepped forward. "Hey, Miller, take it easy on him. He's a regular. Never causes any trouble." Miller shot him a venomous look. "Stay out of it, George. This man is impersonating a member of the armed forces. It's a federal offense." He pushed Samuel out into the cold afternoon air, the bell on the diner door chiming a sad, lonely farewell. The ride to the station was silent. Miller drove with a smug satisfaction, glancing at the old man in his rearview mirror. Samuel stared out the window, his face a mask of placid resignation, watching the small town slide by. He wasn't thinking about the jail cell or the charges. He was thinking of cold water, of the muffled sound of explosions deep beneath the surface, of the faces of friends he could no longer name aloud. He was thinking of the promises he had made to ghosts. At the precinct, Miller paraded his prize through the squad room. "Look what I found down at the diner, boys," he announced loudly. Another weekend warrior trying to cash in on some real hero's glory. A few officers looked up, grunted, and went back to their paperwork. They'd seen Miller's crusades before. But Sergeant Davies, a veteran of 2 tours in Iraq, watched with a troubled expression as Miller roughly guided the old man toward the processing desk. "Name?" Miller barked, shoving a form forward. "Samuel Corbin," the old man replied. "Date of birth, March 12, 1948. Miller paused his typing. "You'd have been what? 20 and 68? Prime time for Vietnam. Is that where you're going to say you were a SEAL? In the jungles?" Samuel said nothing. His silence was a wall that Miller's taunts couldn't penetrate, and it only made the young officer angrier. "Empty your pockets. Belt off. Shoes off." Samuel complied slowly, his movements methodical. He placed a worn leather wallet, a single key, and a folded handkerchief on the counter. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small, heavy object and placed it down with a soft thud. It was a tarnished silver star, its ribbon frayed and faded. Miller picked it up, a dismissive smirk on his face. "Wow, you went all out. Where'd you get this? A pawn shop?" Sergeant Davies walked over, his face grim. "Put that down, Miller," he said, his voice low but firm. He looked at the metal, then at Samuel. He saw the quiet dignity in the old man's posture, the way he stood, even in his socks on the cold linoleum floor. It was a posture Davies recognized. It was the bearing of a man who had been through hell and had no need to prove it to anyone. "Let's just process him, get his prints, and put him in a holding cell," Miller grumbled, annoyed at the interruption. "We need to take his shirt off for the photo and to check for tattoos." "Department policy, just do it quietly," Davies warned, giving Miller a look that was part command, part plea. With a sigh of theatrical frustration, Miller ordered Samuel to face the wall and remove his coat and shirt. The old man's back was a roadmap of a hard life. Thin, stooped shoulders, skin like wrinkled parchment stretched over a bony frame. There were scars, pale and white, crisscrossing his back, some surgical, others jagged and angry-looking. Miller was about to make another sarcastic comment when he saw it. Centered between the shoulder blades was a tattoo. It was old, the ink faded to a bluish gray, but the design was still clear. It was a skull, weathered and fierce, with a Navy SEAL trident piercing it from above. But it was more than that. Surrounding the central image was a wreath of names, intricately inked in a tight, precise script, and below them, a phrase in Latin, Silentium et celeritas. Silence and speed. Miller scoffed. "See? Told you. Probably got it done in some back alley shop for $50. But Sergeant Davies leaned in closer, his eyes wide. He had never seen a tattoo like it, but he had heard stories, whispers from old-timers about unofficial unit markings, tattoos that meant more than any medal. The names, in particular, gave him a chill. They weren't just names, they felt like a memorial. "Miller," Davies said, his voice barely a whisper. "Stop, what now? I need to make a call. Put him in a cell, give him his shirt back, and don't say another word to him until I get back." Davies' tone left no room for argument. He walked quickly to his desk, his face pale, and picked up the phone. He didn't call the FBI or the NCIS. He called a number he hadn't used in 10 years, a direct line to a man he had served under, a man who now wore stars on his collar. An hour passed. Samuel sat on the hard bench in the holding cell, his eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping. He was just waiting. He had been in far worse places than this. He could wait. Miller paced outside the cell, agitated and restless. He felt his authority slipping away, and he hated it. He was sure the sergeant was overreacting, that this old man was just another pathetic liar. Then, the front doors of the precinct opened, and the entire atmosphere of the building changed. A tall, imposing man in the immaculate blue uniform of a rear admiral walked in, flanked by two serious-looking men in dark suits. The admiral's eyes swept the room, and every officer, including the precinct captain who had emerged from his office, straightened up. Sergeant Davies stood beside him, looking relieved and terrified all at once. The admiral's gaze landed on Miller, who suddenly felt like a clumsy child playing dress-up. Then, his eyes moved to the holding cell and settled on the old man sitting on the bench. A look of profound sadness and immense respect crossed the admiral's face. He walked directly to the cell door, ignoring everyone else. "Sam," he said, his voice soft. Samuel opened his eyes. He looked at the admiral, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Hello, Mike," he rasped. "It's been a long time." The admiral nodded to the precinct captain. "Open it." The captain fumbled with the keys and swung the door open. The admiral stepped inside, the small cell barely big enough for the two of them. He stood before Samuel, a four-star admiral before a man in a threadbare shirt, and he brought his hand up in a slow, perfect salute. "The sea remembers its own, Samuel," the admiral said, a phrase that was clearly a code. Samuel slowly, painfully, got to his feet. "And the deep keeps its secrets, Michael," he replied, completing the exchange. The admiral lowered his hand and turned to face the stunned room of police officers. His eyes were like chips of ice. He pointed a finger at a trembling Officer Miller. "You," Step forward. Miller felt his legs turn to lead, but he obeyed, stepping into the center of the room. The Admiral walked out of the cell, leaving Samuel standing there, and stopped directly in front of Miller. He was inches from the young officer's face. "Officer Miller," the Admiral began, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Miller swallowed hard. "A man I suspected of impersonating a military officer, sir." The Admiral let out a short, harsh laugh that had no humor in it. "Suspected? On what grounds? His age? His coat? The fact that he doesn't advertise the hell he walked through for this country." He didn't wait for an answer. "You arrested Samuel, the Ghost Corbin. This man was a founding member of SEAL Team 6. Before that, he was part of MACVSOG's Spike Recon teams in Vietnam. He conducted operations so secret that for 30 years, his entire service record was classified above top secret. The file simply read, 'No record found. He exists in places your worst nightmares are afraid to visit.' The squad room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights." Miller's face had gone from red with anger to ghostly white with fear. The Admiral wasn't finished. He gestured towards Samuel, who was now leaning against the cell wall, watching the scene with those same weary eyes. "You see the Silver Star you mocked? He was awarded 3 of them. He also has 2 Navy Crosses, 5 Bronze Stars for Valor, and 4 Purple Hearts. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the mission was so sensitive it couldn't be declassified, so it was denied. He didn't complain. He just went on to the next mission." The Admiral took a step closer to Miller, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But let's talk about the tattoo. You thought that was some cheap ink, didn't you? Let me educate you." He turned slightly, addressing the entire room now, his voice ringing with authority and reverence. "That is a trident of remembrance. It is not an official marking. It is something far more sacred. Each man in his original unit, a special projects team known as Task Force Neptune, got one. The names you see written around that skull are the men from his team who never came home. He carries their memory on his back. That ink is a tombstone. It's a memorial that he has carried for over 50 years. There are only 2 other men on this planet who have that tattoo, and I am one of them." The Admiral unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his own uniform shirt and pulled the collar aside, revealing the edge of old, faded blue-gray ink on his own collarbone. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Miller looked like he was going to be sick. He had taken a man who was a living legend, a ghost of American military history, and treated him like a common criminal. He hadn't just arrested a veteran. He had desecrated a sacred trust. That tattoo on his back is more real and has more authority than that shiny badge on your chest," the Admiral said, his voice now filled with cold fury. "He has bled for the very right you have to wear that uniform and question his honor. And you used that right to humiliate him over a bowl of soup." He turned to the precinct captain. "Captain, I am taking custody of Mr. Corbin. His record will be expunged of this arrest. In fact, there will be no record this ever happened. Is that understood?" The captain, pale and sweating, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Admiral. Absolutely." The Admiral walked back to Samuel. "Come on, Sam. Let's get you out of here." He put a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder and guided him out of the cell. The 2 men in suits who had arrived with the Admiral moved forward. One handed Samuel his coat, wallet, and keys. The other held his hat, which he presented with the reverence of a knight offering a crown. Samuel took the hat and placed it back on his head. He looked at Officer Miller, whose eyes were now filled with tears of shame. The young man stood shaking, unable to speak, his world completely shattered. Samuel paused, looking directly at him. He saw not an arrogant cop, but a foolish, ignorant boy who had made a terrible mistake. "Everyone makes mistakes, son," Samuel said, his voice soft, holding no malice. "It's what you do after that defines you." With that, he turned and walked with the Admiral toward the exit. The entire squad room, including the captain and Sergeant Davies, stood at rigid attention as he passed. They weren't saluting the Admiral. They were saluting the quiet old man in the threadbare coat. After they left, the Admiral's aide stayed behind. He approached the captain and Officer Miller. "The Admiral believes in teachable moments," the aide said, his voice calm and professional. "Officer Miller, you have 2 options. Option 1. The Admiral makes a formal complaint to the Department of Justice. Your career is over, and you face a civil rights lawsuit that will follow you for the rest of your life. Option 2. You go, right now, to the VA hospital on the edge of town. You volunteer for 1 year. You will spend every weekend cleaning floors, serving meals, and listening to the stories of the men there. And your first act will be to find Mr. Corbin and deliver the most sincere apology of your life. Miller didn't hesitate. Option 2, he choked out. I'll do it. The following Saturday, a humbled and terrified young police officer walked into the common room of the VA hospital. He saw Samuel Corbin sitting by a window, reading a book. He walked over, his hands trembling, and stood before him. Mr. Corbin, he began, his voice cracking. Sir? Samuel looked up from his book. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Sit down, son. Tell me your story. And for the next 2 hours, Miller didn't just apologize. He talked. And for the first time in his life, he truly listened, as a ghost from the past taught him the true meaning of honor, a lesson that had nothing to do with uniforms and regulations, and everything to do with silence, sacrifice, and the names carried on a hero's back.